So many blessings, first of all. So, Yasher Koach for. Thank you, Hashem, for showering all of us with all the blessings and all the amazing things. It's what the Jewish people have always done. We've never let the craziness dictate our direction. And we keep moving forward. And really, that's what the holiday of Shavuot that we're about to celebrate is all about. But it's this year, it's interesting that it's preceded immediately with the Shabbat that leads into Shavuot. So we have Shabbat, and then Saturday night starts Shavuot.
So do the Havdalah first before?
That's interesting. So we don't do it first. We actually combine the Havdalah with the Kiddush. The Kiddush is a hybrid of saying goodbye to Shabbat and a welcome to the Chag. So there's actually a 5-step process called Yak Nahaz. It's basically the blessing on the wine, then the Kiddush, welcoming the Chag. Then we look at the candles to say the Havdalah blessing on the fire, Borei Ma'or Ha'esh. And then we do Havdalah saying goodbye to Shabbat. And then we say Shehechianu to welcome in the energy of Shavuot and the blessings of Shavuot.
What about
spices?
The besamim.
So we don't do the besamim on such when it falls in this way. I'm not entirely sure why not. I think actually the reason is because the idea of the besamim is it says that you have a special additional soul that is gifted to you on Shabbat, and when Shabbat ends, it goes away. So you feel like a weakness, and the spices are meant to reinstate and kind of just like when you smell a strong smell, it kind of reinvigorates you. Like remember, like the old snuff boxes that your grandfather probably used to have. Maybe you have it too. So the besamim is meant to function as kind of to restore that energy that was lost when Shabbat ended. But because we're going from one holy day of Shabbat to another holy day of Shavuot, we don't really feel the withdrawal of Shabbat so much because we're going to another day of another from one high to another. It's like twin peaks. We're going from one peak to the next without experiencing the low in the middle. So we don't need the besamim necessarily. So that's why we don't do.
But what about the Ha'esh?
The Ha'esh is to recognize that there is a difference of the laws of Shabbat and the laws of Chag, of Shavuot. Because on Shabbat, you're not allowed to cook. On Shavuot, you are. So the idea of looking at the fire is to symbolize that now we are allowed to use fire. On Shabbat, you're not allowed to put something on the fire. But on Shavuot, if you have a pre-existing flame, you're allowed to cook on that pre-existing flame. So the fire is still a significant shift between Shabbat and Chag, whereas the spices are not required in this situation. But the theme of Shabbat and the Torah portion of Shabbat, even though it's pre-Shavuot and seemingly not connected to Shavuot, it actually does have a message for Shavuot as well. Because the name of the Torah portion, and in fact it's also the name of the whole entire book, the 4th book of the Torah that we've just begun reading this week, is Bamidbar. Now, seemingly, the word Bamidbar, which means desert, is just giving us a detail of where the Jewish people were when their next communication came from God to Moses to the Jewish people. But we know in Torah there is nothing that's trivial, and there's nothing that's just by the way, and every single word has a profound meaning, a profound idea that's being conveyed. So even the word Bamidbar, which is just a circumstantial situation, a place where they were, is actually a message and even a goal in life. The idea of Bamidbar reminds us that in the desert is specifically where the Torah was given to the Jewish people. If you think about it, it's kind of a little bit odd. If you think of any nation that's trying to establish themselves in a particular country, a particular place, you get into the land, you establish yourself, you build your house of parliament, or you build your Congress, and then you start with your declarations, and you start that way. Whereas the Jewish people, they're still wandering in the desert. They don't even know when they're getting to the land of Israel, and they're already getting their mandate, they're already getting their Torah, their declaration of independence, of being a nation connected to God, in the midst of all the turmoil before they've even settled. So the commentaries in the Talmud explain that the reason why the Torah was given intentionally in the desert is because the desert has a very important aspect to it in contrast to a city or an established place. A desert is what we maybe call no man's land. It's a place where there's no governing body per se that dictates the rules of how one has to behave in that place. It's free and accessible to everybody. And this is a very powerful idea when we think of Torah as well. On one hand, a person may think, oh, Torah, that's for the rabbis and it's under their control and authority. Now, although the rabbis do have a certain understanding of Torah that they share, it's not theirs to give to others. Torah is equally the possession and the heritage of every single Jew, man, woman, and child from 1 day old to 120 years old. And it's true you may have teachers and people that are more learned, less learned, but the fact that it's ours is equal to every single individual. And this is one of the ideas why the Torah was given in the desert, to drive home this message that don't think that you need someone else's permission to connect to Torah or someone's permission to access Torah. Torah is yours directly. It's your own heritage for you to explore on your own volition without any coercion, without any permission needed from anybody else. So this is the Shabbat before and the message of Bamidbar, of being in the desert, that we are reminded of in the association with the Torah. It's accessible to everybody. We don't need permission to access. But then there's another interesting idea in association with the giving of the Torah, which it's described in the Talmud, a fascinating dialogue that went on between the angels and God. It says when Moses came up to Mount Sinai and the angels realized that he was coming up to get the Torah, they turned to God and they said, what are you doing? Are you going to give the Torah to mankind, to fallible human beings who are surely going to let you down and make mistakes, and who knows if they're even going to uphold it and do what you expect and hope they'll do with it? And God
may smash it.
Exactly. And God turns to Moses and says, they have a good point. What do you have to say for yourself? Are you going to answer their complaints? And Moses thinks for a moment and he says, well, in the Torah it says, honor your mother and father. Angels, you don't have a mother and father. This obviously does not apply to you. Furthermore, he goes on and says, in the Torah it says, do not kill, do not steal. Do you have an evil inclination that would even tempt you to do such a thing? The whole Torah is irrelevant to your lifestyle and to the way you exist on the heavenly realms. And they had nothing to respond. And in the commentaries, it explains that there's a very powerful and profound concept that's actually being debated in this discussion, in this dialogue between the angels and Moses. The angels are saying, God, you want the Torah, you obviously want perfection. If you want perfection, it's us. We will never let you down. We cannot let you down. And Moshe turns the tables on them completely and says, the fact that you cannot let God down is actually a negative, because you don't have that human component. You don't have that relationship which is prone to ups and downs, but makes it so genuine and so authentic and so real instead of robotic and automatic. And this is what Moshe is saying. He's saying, if you don't have an evil inclination, then the Torah is not intended for you, because you can't transform, you can't elevate, you can't overcome, you can't work hard on achieving a higher status of spiritual connection and spiritual connection to God. And it's interesting because in the Shema that we say every day, we talk about loving God. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. Love the Lord your God. And we say a very powerful word, b'chal levavacha. Now, b'chal levavacha is actually the root word of heart. But it's interesting that the Hebrew word for heart, more precisely, is lev, which is spelled just with 2 letters, a lamed and a vet. But the way it's spelled in the Shema is lamed vet vet. B'chal levavacha. So why is it spelled with a double vet? So the Talmud says you have to love God with a double level, both sides of your heart. The spiritual side and the animalistic side. The godly side and the mundane side. The evil inclination and the good inclination. Both of them have to be incorporated in the love of God. Meaning to say that the idea of loving God and having a connection, a relationship with God, is not just to ignore the physical, the mundane, and focus on the spiritual and the holy, because then the angels could do a much better job at that. It's to incorporate, to elevate, to take the mundane, to take the challenges, to take the failings even, and find a way to incorporate, to elevate, to uplift, and to include them in the service of God. It just reminds me of a beautiful story which happened with the Rebbe in the 1970s, when the Rebbe would meet people for private audiences, and they would usually go for till 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, sometimes even later. There was one particular fellow who came to 770, and he had just missed the last opportunity to meet the Rebbe. But he had an urgent message, he had an urgent request. His daughter was very sick, and he was desperate to get a blessing. It was a very serious situation. But the secretary said that the Rebbe has already finished his meeting people for the night, and sorry, you can't. So in desperation, he took a piece of paper, put a little note on the paper, and slid it under the Rebbe's door of his office, hoping the Rebbe would see it and at least know about it and give a blessing without even communicating it to him. Sure enough, within a few minutes, he gets a message from the secretary. The Rebbe gave a blessing. Everything's going to be okay. He runs home. He's so excited, so happy he has a blessing. The next day, when everything calmed down, he realized what he had done. He had put a note under the door, and the Rebbe himself had to bend down and pick it up. And he felt very bad about that, making the Rebbe bend down to pick something up. He was an old man and obviously a holy man. So he wrote a note of apology to the Rebbe saying, I thank you for the blessing. I'm so sorry that I made you bend down, and so on. The Rebbe wrote back a beautiful note saying, isn't this my whole purpose? To bend down and pick up others, especially when they're fallen, their spirits are fallen, and when they need a boost. And this really, I think, encapsulates what a Rebbe is, but also what a Jew is, and what our job is. We all have ups and we all have downs. We all have moments where we need to bend down and pick ourselves up. And this is the double love with both sides of our heart. Don't just think we're connecting to God when things are running smoothly and perfectly and beautifully, but even when there's challenges and obstacles and it's not going so smooth, there's a relationship to be had there. And that's what God cherishes over the relationship with the angels. So as we get ready for Shavuot, we're reminded of the unconditional love that God has for us. Just like a parent loves a child for everything that the child is, so too God loves us, and we hope to reciprocate that love and take advantage of the blessings that are available to us in this relationship and enjoy joy and happiness and beauty every single day.
Yes,